I'm here in West Cork with a very old good friend of mine, Professor Richard Kearney. We were at UCT together many years ago, 1975, I think it was, wasn't that it, Richard?
74, 75.
Anyway, this man has done prodigious work in the area of philosophy. How many books? Give me the number. 30s anyway. But he has a new book coming out on touch. He's been spending a lot of time doing research on touch. And I've asked that we might just talk about the importance of touch today and where we are with touch, because obviously we're in the pandemic at the moment and touch is just not something we can do. So, Rich, what you've explored touch now. Well, what's the major findings that you've come across in this area?
Yeah, well, I was very struck by how philosophy ignored touch for 2,000 years, basically. And sight was the main and dominant sense.
Yeah.
And this was set up philosophically by Plato, who, looking at the word for man, anthropos, remarked that it means upward gazer.
Okay.
And he basically said, what makes us human and therefore spiritual and elevated beyond the animals is sight.
Yes.
And what brings us down back into the animal terrestrial world is touch.
Okay.
So touch is the lowest of the senses and sight is the highest.
Yes.
Now Aristotle...
Aristotle came after Plato.
Aristotle came after Plato.
Okay.
And there was a difference between them. But Plato and Platonism won out in this debate.
Yeah.
But Aristotle has a tiny little section on touch in his book De Anima, the first book of human psychology, where he says, well, no, touch nobody speaks about. He says, none of the philosophers speak about, because it's a very evasive and elusive sense to define.
Okay.
But he said, actually, touch, he said, is the most philosophical of the senses. So he disputed.
What does that mean? Says
Well, what he meant by that is that we are, when we touch, of all the senses, we are in a situation where we experience a double sensation. In other words, when we sense, we are also sensed. When we touch something, we're also tangible.
Okay.
Right? Unlike the other senses, you can see, you can hide behind a bush and look at someone and not be seen.
Okay.
You can smell something and not be smelt by it.
Okay.
You can hear someone and not be heard.
Okay.
Right? A good spy knows about that. But when you touch, you have a proximity to things.
Okay, yes.
And you're
yes,
vulnerable
yes.
and exposed.
It's immediate.
Well,
Or is it? No.
it's not immediate,
Okay.
but it's intimate and proximate.
Okay.
I'll get to the question of immediacy and immediacy later if we've time. But so it's what makes us most fragile and vulnerable, and therefore, according to Aristotle, most sensitive, and therefore most likely to think, because he says you only reflect about things when you're struck by them, when you're exposed to them.
Okay.
If you're, if you're hiding behind your eyes and you can see everything, you can dominate everything, but you're not subject to the other.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yeah.
Whereas in touch, that double thing of touching is also being touched.
Yes.
Now later, I won't go into a philosophy lesson here, but Husserl and the phenomenologists of the 20th century will come back to this and say, when you touch your hand, left hand, right hand, touching right hand, you experience touching and being touched at the same time.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Now, the second thing is that we're so vulnerable and exposed and sensitive around touch that we cover ourselves up.
Okay.
We cover ourselves up.
Okay.
But the smooth-skinned person, according to Aristotle, is the most philosophical because the most subject to sensations and sensibilities of the other.
Okay.
And of all our organs, the skin is the largest.
Yes.
So it wraps us around.
Yeah,
I mean, it's actually like a kilometre of skin or something. I don't know the details.
Yeah.
But it's a huge amount of skin that, and apart from our nails and our hair, you cut them, you're not going to scream.
Yes.
But you cut any other part of your skin and you feel pain.
Yes.
You scream unless you're Braveheart and you can endure it. But it's what therefore exposes us to others.
Okay.
All right, and that, to Aristotle, is what therefore makes us think about things, question things, not be so sure of ourselves that we impose our view on things.
Okay.
But optocentrism, as it's called, that is the domination of the optical, won out in the debate.
Okay.
And Platonism, succeeded. Sight became the dominant sense in the West, at any rate. And today we live in a very optical,
Yes.
virtual world where through the computer screen and the iPhone and so on, sight is everything. It has replaced touch in many, many respects. And of course, with the virus, this is even more accentuated, where we're not allowed to touch each other.
Yeah.
And it's when something is forbidden that you appreciate it.
Yes.
As Heidegger says, being towards death is what enables you to ask about being, because you suddenly imagine and experience the possibility of non-being.
Yes,
So
yes, yes.
the possibility and indeed the actuality of non-touch
Yes.
and intangibility and do not touch is actually what reminds us, that door handle which we touch has been touched by 100 people before.
Yes.
Now we're not allowed to go near it.
Yes,
Etc.
What would the world have looked like if Aristotle had won out? I mean, Aristotle saw the sense of touch as the primary, and Plato saw the sense of sight as the primary. If Aristotle had won out, do you think our world would be...
Well, there wouldn't be smart bombs where you see everything through an optical lens, but you suffer no consequences for your actions.
Yes.
And Donald Rumsfeld and war machines, not just in the US, but all the great, their whole thing is psychops. It's psychological warfare through sight and surveillance and drones and whatnot. It's not
long distance.
It's not hand-to-hand combat.
Yes.
And when it was, you felt the pain of war.
Yes.
And the solution to war was moving from hand-to-hand combat to the hand-to-hand handshake.
Okay.
And the first gesture of human civilization is the handshake, where you don't reach for your sword, you expose an open hand.
Okay.
Right. So that's from Greek mythology. Daimonides, Daucus and Daimonides in Homer. It's true of Abraham and the strangers. He feeds them. He brings them into his house. He touches them.
Okay.
So the first acts of civilization are acts of hospitality connected with touch and taste.
Wow. And taste.
So you asked me what would the world look like if we were living in a haptocentric, touch-centered rather than a eye-centered world. It would be, in all probability, peaceful.
Peaceful, that's right.
It would be the handshake rather than the handgun.
What, when you're investigating touch, what was the biggest surprise or thing that you learned for yourself, if you like, rather? I mean, the Plato and the Aristotle, I think, is fascinating as a thing. But what, for you, was the most surprising thing, or...
Well, just...
Why did you go into touch? Yeah, that's really probably...
Because I was challenging the primacy of a certain view of philosophy, which somebody we both admire, Pima Chandran, calls mental aggression.
Okay.
And the best way to undo mental aggression is to touch.
Okay.
And it's also healing. And I come from a family of doctors and healers. And my grandfather, J.J. Kearney, was known as the French doctor here in Cork, in the Bon Secours hospitals and UCC, because he always shook hands.
Wow.
Yeah, always shook hands with everybody. Anyway, it's just a thing that runs in the family. My brother Michael works with the dying, two of my brothers work with the disabled, and I don't, I'm a philosopher who's in my mind. But I'm struck by how healing is so related to touch.
Yes.
And again, in our contemporary lives, people deprived of touch as they're dying of the virus,
Yeah.
And the health workers, they always said that the one thing they couldn't not do was touch them.
Yes.
In loco parentis, because the family weren't allowed in, and they were in this incredible anguish.
Yes.
And the health workers could do nothing, actually, even when they were intubated, but touch them. They all touched them when they were dying.
Okay.
And even, in religious terms, when Mass went and liturgies and religious rituals and so on, sedirs went virtual, it's interesting how many people had the need, as they were watching something on the screen, a religious ceremony, to have a chalice or a candle
I see.
or something they could touch.
At home.
At home.
Okay.
Right? Even though they couldn't touch the Eucharist or the handshake of their fellow in. So I was very struck by that. And then coming back to the question of healing, Asclepius, the founder of Western medicine, there were two, Asclepius and Hippocrates. We have the Hippocratic Oath. And Hippocrates was an Olympian god who believed in surveillance and dominating pain, managing pain, organizing pain, and curing through intervention, whereas Asclepius healed by touch.
Wow. The
Asclepian shrines were places where you went and you were incubated. You lay down, you took herbs, and then there was music and dream and touch.
Okay.
Asclepius always touched. And Chiron, who was the teacher of Asclepius, who was a centaur, was wounded when out hunting, and he got a sword in his thigh, which was incurable.
Right.
But he, instead of fighting back with Heracles, he actually lived with his own pain and healed others in a cave.
Wow.
So it was carrying the pain within him and then healing people through touch. And Chiron is the root of chirurgie, surgeon, the healer.
Oh, wow.
The fine-handed Chiron.
Okay.
So healing began in the Asclepian tradition with touch. Now the Hippocratic's kind of taken over in our Western medicine as opposed to Eastern medicine.
Yes.
But originally the Greek was a balance of both, and we've lost the Asclepian.
Okay.
And we need to retrieve it. And of course in the Gospels, I mean, Jesus healed by touch.
Yes.
I mean, every second word, I was so struck by that when I have a section in the book called Wounded Healers, and I do Chiron and Asclepius on the Greek side, and then I'm looking at the Abrahamic side. So there's Jacob, with the angel, wrestling, touching, wounding, healing, and then Jesus, every second thing, the most remarkable of all being the hemorrhaging woman.
Yes, touching
where
his garment.
He's touched. And that's also the double sensation.
Yes, yeah, God.
Right? Touching and being touched.
Yeah, you're not just looking on, he touched and being touched. Yeah. He knew he was touched, she knew she touched him.
Exactly.
I was very struck earlier by your talk about animals, and you live a lot in your head, obviously, by the work you do, but you really have a passion for animals. And I sensed something about that and touch.
Yeah.
I don't know that, but there's some immediacy about animals and nature that brings you from the head into
brings you back to your skin.
Yeah.
Back to your skin, back to your flesh. Yes, and well, just to talk personally and autobiographically, in my own case, always had animals and very attached to animals, grew up with them. Every time my mother had a child, my father brought home a dog, a puppy. So we all had a puppy to kind of cope with the loss of our mother, who'd gone on to have another child, and there were 7 of us. So there's 7 children and 7 dogs. So we all had our dog as our surrogate mother. Okay. And I had one called Scamp, who I was very fond of, and so on. So then there were animals, and then my mother grew up in Ballinrobe and during the Second World War, and she loved horses, Connemara ponies.
So there's something about that connection with animals, which is that has that immediacy, that lack of suspicion or whatever it is. Yeah.
I mean, we all know about care. What do they call them? Care dogs or something.
Yes, yeah.
For people in terms of loneliness and so on, the heartbeat goes down, and cortisone, and not cortisone. What is it?
Cortisol.
Oxytocin.
Oxytocin. Yeah.
Is emitted.
Happy. Yeah. The happy.
It's actually what the mother and child have when the child is breastfeeding.
That's right.
In both bodies.
That's why breastfeeding is so important.
Yes, and it's the love drug in a way. Natural of the body, of the flesh. So hippotherapy is huge, or equine therapy as it's called.
Oh yeah, in John of God's, when I was there, they used to bring in a little Shetland pony for people to stroke and to brush and to touch, to be out touching the animal.
Well, I remember I had a very bad depression down here in West Cork about 20 years ago now, and what cured me was swimming in the Coal Sea, which is touch too.
Yes.
Aquatic touch, but riding my sister-in-law's horse, a mare called Mary, and just riding her every day, just the touch, you know, and I think that's what cured me.
One of the most moving things I have seen, or I love to remember, is watching a man ploughing a field with a horse in West Cork, and the communion between both of them, you know, the harmony.
Yeah.
And the other thing I remember with elephants is us riding an elephant in India together.
I do. I remember those spiky hairs.
Spiky
Oh my
hairs.
God.
What about touch?
It's quite true. Yeah. Now, what about bees? I mean,
Oh, the bees, well,
now, is there touch there or not? Because you know, don't touch the bees.
Well,
'cause
what's
it might get
very
stung.
interesting, I have a clip that I got the other day with my bees, and there was, the bees were, they rely a lot on touch.
Do they?
Because if you think about it, they're operating in the dark.
Yeah.
Their hive is in the dark.
Never thought of that.
And so they've got to communicate. They can't turn on the lights. So they touch each other and communicate by chemicals and by dancing. They do the dance and the others can feel it.
Yeah.
So it's all to do with touch. I hadn't thought of this, but it's all to do with touch.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's you're right, bees and touch. Any last word on touch for people that you would strike you or?
Yeah, well, you know, I suppose you sort of said, how did you come to think about touch as so important?
Worth writing a book about.
Yeah, and the subtitle is, you know, rediscovering our most vital sense.
Okay.
Which is also our most neglected sense.
Yes.
Right? But I think in terms of just war and peace, I know that sounds grandiloquent, but if you think of it, all the great peace moments came from a handshake.
Okay.
Right? You put down the gun and you shake the hand. And some of them are very controversial. Mandela and de Klerk, who thought that would ever happen?
Oh, yes.
Right?
Yes,
Reagan
yes.
and Sadat, Jerry Adams and John Hume.
Yes.
You know, they were execrated. Hume was execrated for shaking hands with Jerry Adams. Do you shake hands with the devil? Well, if you don't shake hands with the devil, you're not going to have peace.
Yes.
So the handshake is huge, and that is exposed skin to exposed skin.
And vital, you said yesterday that the word vital was important.
Because it's life, you know, touch is life. It's your first sense in the womb, and it's your last sense when you die.
Is it?
Touch.
Okay.
Yeah. Tactile. And you know, when a body dies,
yes.
You know, when a living body becomes a corpse, it is no longer vital, and it loses touch.
I see.
Touch goes. That's why you can cut the wound and the person doesn't feel it.
Okay. Well, that seems like a good.
Begin and end with touch.
That's brilliant. That sounds like a good place to end. Richard, thank you.
A pleasure.
Lovely conversation as usual, and we'll see you next time. So, God bless and good luck from West Cork in the sun, bathed in sunshine.
Sláinte.
Sláinte.